I don't really want to do this, because I can already imagine the discourse in the comments, and I am absolutely dreading how many times I'll have to repeat myself despite my full thoughts being in the video. That said, one of my biggest pet peeves is people getting information wrong and then continuously perpetuating a non-truth. It irks me to my very core. It's like if someone insisted that 2 + 2 was 5, and a whole bunch of people agreed with this, despite it very obviously not being true. Whether or not they're all trolling doesn't matter, because I'm already intensely bothered. It's giving...
Touching me! She's touching me!
I'm not touching you!
You're touching me!
Not touching!
Touching me!
Hello everyone, my name's Aloubell, and if you never see me again, it's because those who disagree with me have formed an angry mob and found my location. They are burying me alive right now, as we speak. And no, I will never be found. A little while ago, I watched a YouTube short in which the poster said that listening to audiobooks is the same thing as reading. I don't remember what specific video this was. I don't even remember what the person looked like, so please forgive me. It was during a late night scrolling session, and things just kind of happen real fast. But then I came across this again in a post by Lainey Embroidery Artist on Blue Sky. Follow me there, by the way, link down below. Follow Lainey too if you're into embroidery, because there is some really impressive artistry there. But with the matter at hand, I couldn't help but think, wow, that's wrong, but okay. And then I went into the comments, and my goodness, too many people agreed with this thought. Pet peeve activated. From this point forward, I want everyone to know that despite how cheeky I sound, and despite how it may come off as me lecturing you, I promise you that this comes from a place of love, and I'm trying to say all of this with as much respect as I can. I know there are people out there who feel very strongly about this topic for whatever reason, and I have no intention of insulting or belittling anyone. So please hear me out, and please watch the entire video before forming your final opinion. Thank you. First off, you read a book and you listen to an audiobook. Last time I checked, reading and listening were not synonymous words. Sure, you technically could say that you read an audiobook, but aside from the awkward implication that you somehow read sounds, if someone were to ask you how you read the audiobook, you'd reply that you listened to it. And once again, listening and reading are not synonymous words. For reading to occur, you need either a visual stimulus or a physical one, using the senses of sight and touch. But for listening to occur, you need only an auditory stimulus. Reading and listening are both things that you do, but they are done differently. The act of reading a story or book or whatever is a very specific action that is undeniable when it is occurring. Whereas, if you subscribe to the idea that listening to an audiobook is the exact same thing as reading, then at what point does listening become reading? You listen to things every day. You listen to the radio, you listen to music, you listen to conversations, etc. When does listening become reading? Would you say only when literature is involved? But what about stories that were never written down, such as in the past before the written language was even a thing? Were our ancient ancestors reading when they passed on oral tales? Of course not. The idea that reading and listening are the same is very similar to the notion that smelling chocolate is the same as tasting chocolate. Yes, smell and taste are connected physiologically, but they are still different and serve different functions. But as for the current topic, let's look at the definition of reading, shall we? Wikipedia, do your thing.
Reading is the process of taking in the sense or meaning of symbols, often specifically those of a written language, by means of sight or touch. For educators and researchers, reading is a multifaceted process involving such areas as word recognition, orthography, spelling, alphabetics, phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency, and motivation. Other types of reading and writing, such as pictograms, for example, a hazard symbol and an emoji, are not based on speech-based writing systems. The common link is the interpretation of symbols to extract the meaning from the visual notations or tactile signals, as in the case of Braille.
Thank you, Wikipedia. Notice how listening is nowhere there, but also notice that Braille is because it is a means of interpreting symbols. You can't hear symbols. And I don't mean the instrument. You hear sounds. You see or feel symbols. Reading is a skill that you have to be taught. Reading is a skill that is activated upon exposure to these symbols. No symbols to interact with, no reading. Like I said earlier, if listening counts as reading, then are you reading when someone is talking to you? No, you're not. If someone is telling you a story about how they visited a farm when they were a kid, are you reading this story? No, you are not.
But Aloe, listening is a skill as well. You have to learn the language and be able to correctly interpret the sounds you hear in order to take in the intended information.
You are correct. Listening is also a skill. It is a very important skill. It is a skill imperative to our survival. To most species' survival, to be honest. But it is a different skill to understand what you heard versus understanding what you read.
But Aloe, some researchers proved in a study that when you're listening to a story being read to you, it's activating the same parts of your brain as when you read.
I mean, without having read the articles myself, that could easily just be the parts of your brain taking in and processing information, as well as the parts of your brain involved in memory and imagination at work, which I imagine just sort of happens when you take in a steady stream of new information. Although, if you want to be really petty and specific about a counter-argument, clearly the people who are listening to stories have the part of the brain that processes audio information activated, which otherwise wouldn't be activated for someone who is just reading to themselves. And even if that person were to read out loud, you're involving a different part of your brain that allows you to speak. Not to mention the parts of the brain in charge of sight and touch would be involved with the actual readers in a way that the listeners wouldn't be. So no, a brain processing a story via listening is not the exact same as a brain processing information visually. There's overlap, but it's not the same. Of course, I'm not a brain expert by any means. There is a chance that I'm wrong. But shout out to my anatomy and function of the brain professor from university who managed to make that class fun. Yes, as a psychology major, I had to take this class and I absolutely dreaded the idea of it. But it was actually a good time. Shows you the power of a good teacher. But I digress. That said, even if I were to give it to you and say that the brain is doing the exact same work for both, so what? That's almost like saying since sports video games give you the same rush of dopamine and endorphins as playing the actual sport, then that must mean that playing video game sports is no different than actually playing the sport. You see the problem, right? I mean, even then, my previous argument about different parts of the brain are still at play regardless of the overlap. Some physiological similarities aside, reading and listening are still two different skills that require different processes. In other words, you actively do them differently, and the skills for both are tested differently. I'm sure in school you were given different evaluations to see how well you could read. I know I remember being sat down by my teacher to test how fast I could read something without making any errors. I remember having to learn how to see different letter combinations and accurately pronounce them. I remember having to put all of these skills together by being given paragraphs to interpret, by correctly deciphering the symbols on the page and making enough sense out of them in order to put together a summary or main idea. I'm sure those who use Braille to read had similar experiences. Being able to listen is certainly an important factor in being able to read. After all, the written language was basically birthed from vocal storytelling and such. But there's clearly a population of people who are unable to hear and yet can still read. That being said, listening is a separate skill that is taught and evaluated in its own unique ways. It stands to reason that just listening to something in order to take in the information is an even more difficult skill because to some extent it involves memorizing what was heard. You don't have the symbols to guide you, so you have to rely on memory and how well your receptive language is. In other words, if you can make sense out of the sounds going into your ears and react to them expectantly. At the end of the day, you can be a very good listener and a very bad reader. Likewise, you can be a very good reader and a bad listener. We all learn differently, and that's okay. Just because you listen to something to take in information doesn't make you any less valid than reading to take in information. Some people can't read because of a disability they have, or maybe they just weren't taught the skill of reading. And yet, these can still be very brilliant people because maybe they listened very closely to information that was fed to them, and maybe they had some hands-on learning. It's all good. Some people learn by listening. Some people learn by reading. Some people learn by doing. Some people learn by watching. And Rainbow Dash learns by flying. There's different ways, even beyond these, and it's all good. You aren't dumb if you can't read well, and you aren't lazy if you have a hard time finding the time to. Audiobooks are an excellent resource for obtaining information. And if you are able to get through hundreds of novels and experience them in their totality and appreciate them the exact way that the author intended for you to, then great. Fantastic. More power to you. And great job having the patience to take in all of that information. I'm so super glad that you found a way of experiencing a story or learning something that works for you. But I'm sorry, you aren't reading as far as the definition of reading goes. I don't understand why there is such a pushback when it comes to certain people not wanting to admit that listening to audiobooks is not the same thing as actually reading. Judging by the replies, this feels like an intense defense mechanism due to what I can only assume was bullying and condescension by those who see reading as a superior way to get information from a book. Maybe something along the lines of,
"Oh, you listened to the book? Why, you must be tragically unintelligent. It must be so shameful knowing you can't read. What's wrong? Are you allergic to paper or something? What do you mean you don't have the time to pick up a book? You must not want it that badly. Please excuse us while the rest of us intellectuals stick our noses in the air and use our big brains to actually read with our eyeballs. Don't ask me how that works. We're just built different, you peasant."
if someone ever looked down on you because you listen to audiobooks, I am so sorry. You didn't deserve that. You deserve love. You are valid in how you take in information. You are using your listening skills, and I respect you. Here's a cookie. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, not like in a, "oh, here's a cookie, you must feel so special" kind of way. No, cookies are my love language. This is me extending out an olive branch of peace. Now, if you still disagree with me after I've said all of this, then you know what? I did my best. I said my piece, so now I open the floor to all of you. What is your stance on the matter? Do you agree with me that audiobooks are a perfectly valid way to take in information but don't count as reading? Or do you still believe that listening and reading are synonyms? I myself do enjoy listening to stories. I sometimes listen to the audio Bible, children's books, or fairy tales. For some of these things, getting these stories auditorially is the only way for me to enjoy them due to not having access to the physical or full copies. Or, just not having the time to read it myself. So I certainly appreciate the ability and privilege to be able to listen to them. Do you have any books or stories you like to listen to? Put the book emoji in the comments and let's get this conversation started. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and follow me at my socials in the description. Special thanks to my channel members, especially Little Pip TV and Broly Samuel. You guys are awesome. Until next time, that's all there is. There isn't any more.